Siamo a Bergamo per un evento incentrato sul CD38, soprattutto sui farmaci anti-CD38, oggi considerati fondamentali per la cura del mieloma multiplo. Il primo di questi farmaci a entrare in terapia è stato il daratumumab e qui abbiamo avuto la fortuna di incontrare i due medici che per primi hanno utilizzato questo farmaco a livello mondiale, che sono Torben Plesner e Paul Richardson. Ci è sembrato molto interessante farci raccontare la loro storia, come è andata, chiaramente le prime preoccupazioni e poi naturalmente la soddisfazione di vedere un farmaco che si è poi affermato in tutto il mondo.
Professor Plesner, how the story of daratumumab began? Tell us why you decided to try daratumumab. Which was the original idea?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Paul Richardson and I, we were invited for a meeting with a small Danish-Dutch biotech company called Mieloma in Copenhagen in 2007. They had developed a CD38 antibody. They thought it would be of interest for the treatment of multiple myeloma because they found that CD38 was highly expressed on myeloma cells. And we met in Copenhagen and we were worried because there was a lot of expression of CD38 everywhere in the body on all cells. So we were expecting to have a lot of side effects.
I think that's, yeah.
What convinced you to use daratumumab?
Well, I think the first thing to say, just to build on what Torben said, is with that very amazing seminal meeting in 2007, we had concerns about safety. And this was exemplified because there had been not only in the immunotherapy world a normal volunteer study involving a T-cell targeting agent that had resulted tragically in volunteers dying, which had obviously thrown a huge cloud over the field. But moreover, with the very early animal experiments with daratumumab, unfortunately there had been a chimpanzee that had died during daratumumab infusion. As it happened and transpired, that death was not related to the drug. In fact, it was related to poor apiary conditions and the fact that the poor chimpanzee had a virus. So this was entirely unrelated. But with that kind of background, we had to approach the first study, 501. It was my privilege to work with Torben, and we worked together with other colleagues where we started at very low doses of daratumumab, and Torben led the charge with his patients.
It was almost pure water we were infusing into the first patients, and I must say, these patients were very brave to accept to be treated with something that was very, very unlikely to do any benefit to them, but could potentially be very harmful. So some patients said yes, and we were able to recruit patients. The recruitment was slow, but there were a lot of amendments to the protocol because of findings on the way. So we had a slow development, and sometimes we were losing confidence in this.
I think it was a very long journey, but a journey in which we fundamentally believed in the construct, and above all, we were showing safety. So Torben's quite right. Our patients were incredibly courageous to participate, but the first and foremost, no one suffered ill effects, which was the most important endpoint of any phase 1. And then magically, as we got to higher dose levels, we started to see some really exciting signals. And it was a privilege to see this. And in fact, 2 of my patients who were enrolled towards the end of the study were on the drug, have been on the drug for over 10 years. So this is just an example of how participating in an early phase trial could be an incredible benefit to the patient as well. So on the one hand, we had this very strong sense of safety. And on the other hand, as we got to higher doses, we suddenly saw these responses.
So in 2012, we could report that we had a signal of efficacy, and that was a long journey from 2008 to 2012 until we had this signal. But from then on, everything went very fast.
Yes, I think it's a tribute to the whole investigator community in the world of daratumumab and CD38 that once we had got over this critical hurdle of showing safety, and then we had a very large trial in 501 where we were able to do this dose expansion phase, which gave great confidence to us as a clinical research group, and that not only were we seeing safety, but we were also seeing a clear about 30% response rate with durable responses, as I mentioned. And what's so interesting is we saw objective responses in about a third of patients. We saw about another third of patients have what we call minimal or reasonable responses, but a lot of stable disease. And this was an incredibly important signal because these were refractory patients. And above all, tolerance was excellent.
Yeah.
And finally, the drug got the approval.
Step by step, we had first approval of DARA monotherapy for patients with advanced disease, and then came the combinations step by step again, moving from relapsed refractory myeloma and upwards to the front line.
I think it's incredibly important to share with the audience that we were informed by really important laboratory studies. We had colleagues in the laboratory who were combining daratumumab with immunomodulatory drugs and with proteasome inhibitors, and showing that there was at least an additive signature with proteasome inhibitors, and in fact they were even more powerful with the immunomodulatory drugs. So Torben led the first combination of daratumumab and lenalidomide, and it was a privilege to be part of that trial as well. And there we really saw some excitement, saw some dramatic responses with the combinations. And then importantly, there was a study called the Sirius trial that was building on 501. And this was an American study led by my colleague Sagalonio. And we participated in that we were able to show that the dose was right that we'd found in 501. So we had the big 501 study with the dose confirmed. This was the phase 1/2. Then we had this randomized phase 2 large study. So these two trials together formed the body for the approval that you mentioned. And then the combinations led by Torben first with daratumumab and lenalidomide, and then our colleague Antonio Palumbo, who led the combination of bortezomib and daratumumab. And literally, the rest is history.
At which point are we now in the life of the drug?
We now see daratumumab as a frontline drug, and useful for both patients that are transplant eligible and non-eligible.
Yes. Yeah. I just want to especially acknowledge our colleagues in the daratumumab community, because with Torben's pivotal work with daratumumab and lenalidomide, our colleague Thanos Dimopoulos led with the European partnership in particular, the study, the so-called Pollux trial. Antonio led the Castor trial, and literally these are cosmic names, and the trajectory of the drug was arguably cosmic. It was remarkable, and the benefit we saw in our patients was just wonderful to see.
Which was the world before daratumumab and now after daratumumab?
So now daratumumab is standard of care for both elderly and younger myeloma patients, and the survival of the patients has been improved dramatically without any significant side effects.
I think it's really important to share that from this relapse refractory space that Torben and I have just been discussing, Torben mentioned it moved up to the upfront space, and that's exactly what we saw. And a couple of the early phase studies, well, not earliest large phase 3 trials in the upfront setting, i.e. treating newly diagnosed myeloma, were remarkable. And the first one was led by Dr. Mary V. Mateus. She led the study combining VMP, as we used to call it, combined with daratumumab or without, and showed a striking benefit. And then our colleague Philippe Moreau led the combination of VTD plus daratumumab up front, and then
the transplant eligible.
Exactly. And then in the transplant eligible group, our own team, led by my colleague Peter Voorhees and my partner at work, Dr. Jacob Laubach, led the Griffin study, which was RVD plus daratumumab. So all of these studies started to move very quickly up front. And then the Maya trial was really exceptional, and this was actually led by Dr. Thierry Facon. So we had an extraordinary group of investigators all working together to bring Dara to its fruition.
And what's next? What's in the future of the drug?
So the uptake in the community has been great. So everybody is using daratumumab now in combinations with other anti-myeloma drugs, both for elderly and the younger myeloma patients. We are still working to optimize the use of this, because some of our colleagues are perhaps reluctant to continue treatment, but we think that's important with long-term use to have the maximum benefit out of the drug. Still, we do see patients failing treatment, and we are facing a new situation with novel agents coming.
I think that's very fair. I think the important point to share with the audience is, whilst daratumumab has been a major advance and has made a huge difference to so many patients, unfortunately myeloma does remain essentially incurable today, although I think the outlook is getting better and better every year that goes by. So we now have next generation platforms ranging from other small molecules, other antibodies, and of course now the real revolution in CAR T therapy and T-cell redirected treatments, so-called bispecifics. And these bispecifics are really, I think, that, this next wave of immunotherapy is going to be further transformative. But I think not for a minute should we underestimate that it's not one versus the other. It's this whole continuum of benefit that's coming through. And I think an incredibly important point to share is that the CD38 space, which is upon which daratumumab is based, and as Torben taught us today, it's CD38 targeting therapy. It's CD38 antibodies, not anti-CD38 antibodies. Great point. The fact is we also have other antibodies in the space, most importantly isatuximab, which really has shown us that it has, in my opinion, some important differences qualitatively to the way it behaves in the preclinical setting, and this now may be translating to the clinic as well. So we're really excited to have a choice of options for our patients, and that's above all what they need.
It's a very nice story. Thank you for telling us about it.
It has been a privilege.
Has been a privilege. It has been a wonderful journey, and thank you for your interest.
Thank you.